99 dinara. 99 dinara. 99 dinara. Danas imamo nevjerojatno
Prevaranti, ovo sigurno nisu originalni.
Palantir being an example, that was set up with state involvement, CIA involvement. DARPA, which is part of the US military, called Total Information Awareness, and then this was privatized by Peter Thiel and some other people and turned into Palantir. DARPA's LifeLog project, in the same vein, was privatized and turned into Facebook, again with the involvement of Peter Thiel. People on the left and right alike were extremely opposed to these programs when they were being run by the military, by DARPA, but then you go and turn them into a private sector entity that does essentially the same thing. There's efforts to manipulate everything going on. And I think particularly in the Bitcoin space, people need to decide if it's going to be something that they want to let be co-opted by Wall Street, or if people in the Bitcoin space want to fight for it to be the tool it was originally marketed and sold to people as a tool for, sovereignty and financial freedom. Because if it ceases to become that and becomes like the chief means of asset storage for BlackRock and associated institutions, for them to usher in this new global financial governance system and financial system that they want to impose on everybody. I mean, what does that mean for the values that supposedly underpin Bitcoin in the first place? And, what are we doing here and what are we supporting? These questions need to be asked. And I think it's very important that, people that want to oppose the Wall Streetization, I guess, of Bitcoin sort of look at what can be done to allow its functionality as a currency for that to be able to scale and sort of avoid the efforts to sort of make it only a commodity in the hands of the same people on Wall Street that manipulate the prices of all other commodities for their benefit. I mean, do we really want to let Bitcoin become one of those heavily manipulated commodities that serve the Wall Street bankers, especially when Bitcoin was created as a way to hedge against irresponsible monetary policy and Wall Street corruption? I think, we're at a stage where it's very important to, ask ourselves what we're doing and to take a stand accordingly. The first time I really wrote meaningfully about Larry Fink was probably a few years ago in relations to the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, where Larry Fink is a principal. It's like a UN-sponsored organization that was co-founded by Mark Carney, former head of the Bank of England and later Bank of Canada, former Goldman Sachs, and also Mike Bloomberg is a big figure there, the former mayor of New York and a well-known billionaire who, started off at Salomon Brothers. So these are essentially bankers developing what amounts to a major component of UN-sponsored policy directly related to their climate change policies. Basically, what GFANZ proposes is creating a new financial governance system, seizing what they call the new Bretton Woods moment, basically, recreating the global financial system and also reimagining the multilateral development banks, like the World Bank, the IMF, et cetera, which came out of actual Bretton Woods, right? So they want to move all of that into a new paradigm. Larry Fink's been particularly vocal about that. And what GFANZ proposes specifically is merging the members of GFANZ with the multilateral development banks as a way to basically use the same debt slavery model that the MDBs have been criticized for using. But instead of using it to further US empire or the dollar and things of that nature, it's instead the proposal is to use it to create better enabling environments in countries for the green investments of these large financial institutions and asset managers. So it's basically like perpetuating the same model of the MDBs, but having basically Wall Street run it under the guise that it's a planetary necessity and that we can't get to net zero without this, which frankly, if you look into the explanations for that, there's no way that's the case. But that's, how I first started writing about Larry Fink was because of his involvement in this relatively open plan to create a new financial system, which among other things doesn't just rest on the MDBs, but also on the development of global carbon markets, which comes up in this particular piece in a pretty meaningful way.
When you look at this, Witney, do you consider this as BlackRock using their power to rent seek off government policy? Or do you think these people are just purely evil thieves?
Well, Larry Fink is someone who's obviously a member of the elite, and he's also a person who throughout his entire career has been pretty obsessed with risk management. So I think, whatever this new financial system is, he is, part of this group that's proposing this, ultimately is about trying to enable BlackRock to continue its massive expansion to own, essentially everything with, as little risk to them as possible, which obviously a lot of the stuff that Fink is pushing for is part of this broader system that the world's being pushed into under the guise of sustainable development that includes things like digital IDs and carbon markets and all of that, setting something up where it's will be be very difficult to challenge BlackRock's financial prominence and dominance, really, and anything that Fink and others would view as a risk to their current trajectory. I guess they don't really have to worry about people or movements like that as they enter into and sort of impose upon us these new systems, which includes, some of these forms of digital control, like the CBDC and their private sector equivalents, for example, programmable surveillable money, tied into the digital ID thing. All of this, as is noted in the article, is meant to interface.
Why do some people seem to attract luck, opportunities, and protection, while others struggle, no matter how
with global carbon markets and the multilateral development banks that Fink has been targeting in particular through GFANs, and also BlackRock itself has been pretty focused on them. They're seeking to, the World Bank is developing climate wallet functionality and a lot of this other infrastructure on which global carbon markets would rely, and are also attempting to become the main data storage for the digital ID system as well. So a lot of big moves are being made through these institutions for part of this new global financial governance system, as GFANs calls it.
But therefore, Witney, did you raise your eyes recently when Elon Musk raised the idea of a carbon tax